Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Today's conversation features Matt Geraghty and Ze&rsquo from the Trade Winds Project. Matt is a bass player, he's American, and Ze&rsquo is a saxophone player, he's Brazilian. I mention this, by the way, because in order to tell the difference between Matt and Ze when the conversation is rolling, you can watch out for Ze's Brazilian accent. It should make it clear who's who. And along with filmmaker Laura Newman, they've been traveling to port cities in the Americas, tracing the triangle trade routes of the 17th and 18th centuries in reverse, and looking for common musical connections between them. To unpack that a little bit, the triangle trade route essentially connected the Old World to the New World, sending slaves from West Africa to the Americas and goods from the Americas back to Europe or even to Africa. Along the way, African traditions had a profound influence on the music of each of those locations. Matt, Ze, and Laura started in New York. Then they went to New Orleans, followed by San Juan, Puerto Rico, and most recently, Havana, Cuba. In each location, they spent 21 days, each day assembling a new group of musicians and spontaneously composing original music. And each day, they post a new video of the experience. I've known Matt for years. We met years ago when we were both still living in the Midwest, he in Chicago and me in Madison, Wisconsin, and we would play gigs together occasionally. He and I both relocated to New York over a decade ago, and recently he got in touch with me to let me know about this project. When I watched the series, I was struck by the intensity of the experience and by the general positivity among all of the musicians they encountered. I was particularly curious to talk about what effect the experience has had on Matt and Ze's lives outside of the project. One of the things that struck me was the way these guys had to surrender themselves to the uncertainty of the experience. They show up often in a place where they don't know anybody. They have to find musicians, great musicians if possible. They have to explain the entire project, convince them to improvise an original piece of music together for a video. And aside from all of the production and logistical aspects of the project, they have to then themselves perform with these musicians. They have to be ready to surrender to the moment creatively. If they can't do it, how could they possibly expect anybody else to do it? There's something very powerful about people in the midst of the chaos of production having to themselves surrender to the moment. And when I asked them about this, they both agreed that that was the most transformational and fundamentally powerful part of the experience. You know, as Ze says towards the end of the conversation, people forget that it's all about now and it's all about us. And that's what I'm taking away from this whole thing. And he also said when you've been living in the present moment that way, with that level of intensity for long enough, it's an addiction and you don't want to let go of it. So you have to apply it to the rest of your life. Whether you're making dinner, whether you're on the subway, whether you're doing an interview like the one that we just did. So I was very moved by this conversation in many ways. And I think that the other real takeaway here is the positivity and enthusiasm that they encountered from musicians all over the world. So as I say, I was very moved by the conversation and I'm really excited to share it with you. So I invite you now to just keep listening. I'm not going to preface this with any musical sample of the project because they've done so many of these little vignettes, 84, 85 of them they've done. So rather than choosing one to play for you, I'm just going to give you the website, mgp21.com, where you can see all of them. And without any further preamble, let's get started with the conversation with Matt Geraghty and Ze&rsquo of the Trade Winds Project. You know, I don't generally talk to people specific to one project, but this project is not like a record or a gig or something that's kind of happens once and then it's over. It's obviously an ongoing thing, and it seems to be an exercise of putting music in life and interacting with, you know, real life and people in their sort of natural habitats. The first thing I'm curious about is just where this idea came from.
Well, it came from my childhood best friend, right? Bill Wadman. He lives in the neighborhood. He's a photographer. He started a project called 365 where he took a portrait of a person every day for 365 days. He would travel around New York, take a photo, you know, put it up. It'd be super professional, and that's how he found his style, right? I was like, if Billy can do that with photography, how would I do that with music? And it was also coming from a place of, after being in New York for 7, 8 years of wanting to do something fresh and interesting, and that was outside of my own project, the Matt Geraghty project. How do I find a way to break down some of the barriers that exist within the local musical cliques, the Brazilian music scene, the funk scene, the Indian scene, the jazz scene, and all the divisions in that. And this idea came out of creating 21 brand new bands in 21 days. Where am I going to do it? I'm not going to be able to do it where I just recorded my last album at Avatar Studios. Let's think grassroots and do it in my apartment. What we did was film over 40 musicians from all different styles, daily releasing the videos. And that was kind of the incubator that led to these other ideas evolving into trade winds to bring it on the road, doing the triangle trade routes backwards to coastal cities, and building collectives of musicians around the world. And right now we are about at 250 premier players in 4 cities: New York City, New Orleans, San Juan, and now Cuba. We film improvisations, and the only rule that we have about the music is no one talks. We just play an improvised composition in the spot.
So when you first did the initial project in New York in your apartment, how did you decide who to call? How did you structure the sessions? How did you put it together?
On the fly. And that's part of the nature of what we're doing. But of course I had a calendar. Of course I knew the players that I wanted to be part of the project, some that were on the singer-songwriter scene, some of that were on the Brazilian scene, and really cutting across all genres. So how I did it really was coming up with the concept, the vision, and inviting players in to be part of these sessions. But the magic is how you mix and match the different players. Stylistically, you could mix and match things up, and what I learned resoundingly is that musicians jumped at the opportunity because they wanted to do something fresh and new.
What surprised you about the process?
How much musicians appreciate being able to create spontaneous work in the moment and not follow rules predetermined.
Yeah. I also observed, like you, agreeing with you, but just adding to it, I observed that everybody was looking for alternative situation, you know. Everybody is kind of doing the same thing, kind of looking for gigs, and let's do that thing, let's achieve that success, or let's sharpen up in that genre or something like that. And suddenly we're like kids, you know, let's jam, let's not talk about it. There's no form, you don't need to learn anything, you just have to pick up what is your savviness about the music and express yourself. And really people, in the end, we always talk about that. In the end, people look like kids, man. They have this sparkle in their eyes, you know, and it was really surprising how much they wanted to participate, even though there was no big compensation or promise of any success, or we're going to be first in the die, or from this gig you're going to get another gig. It was going, let's get together and make art, really, you know. Yeah. Let's look for the beauty, for the diamond, you know.
At what point did you decide to do this together? Because initially it was kind of a personal exploration of yours, Matt, and at some point you brought Ze in on the project. That's
right. It was during 21 where I invited Ze to play flute and saxophone in a couple different sessions. Yes. And we, you know, had done some playing before, but this was a new kind of chapter where I saw Ze as someone who could support the work in a more of a production and advisory role. And so that was an important chapter of bringing Ze in and, you know, thinking big picture about the work.
And being Brazilian, to fit into that thing, being an immigrant, you know, like I saw the beauty of it, and for me an opportunity as a musician and producer. And then we got tighter and tighter, you know, like, and my role kind of grew to what it is now.
Matt, you know, when you did the first 21 here, you were bringing people into a space that was essentially a known entity. It was a controllable environment. It was your world. I wonder if there was a little part of you that understood that before you went into other people's spaces, that it would be good to have a certain kind of partner in crime, somebody that would be with you to do it, because it's a very scary thing to go into a new place, even with a great idea and an open heart. And not only did you bring somebody who's very open personally and affable, but as an immigrant, this is exactly what you had to do, is you had to come to a new culture with your horn on your back and kind of make it happen.
Start from scratch, right?
Yes.
So that's familiar to you.
That's familiar to me, but I have to say one thing. Matt is not an average American guy, very much traveled, speak different languages, and diplomat by nature, and he's very savvy about that. But of course, when we're together, each one of us play a card, there's a difference in access of our diplomacy together, if there's a business happening, the good guy, bad guy, or, sometimes in Cuba, supposedly, because I'm Brazilian, there's such a brotherhood between Brazil and Cuba. There was many moments that people would say, wow, Brazil, that's great. And so the acceptability of our coming will come sometimes from that. But nevertheless, Matt is always incredible in his posture, business attitude, and extraordinary to observe that.
It's very interesting, this idea that in Cuba there was some real added benefit to, number one, being Brazilian, and number two, not being American.
Exactly.
You guys went to Cuba at this incredible time. You went in this fertile, rich, incredibly intense moment for Cuba. You knew you always wanted to put Havana on the list.
It was top of the list, right?
So you're following the trade routes.
That's right, backwards.
Eventually you want to go back to Africa.
That's right. That's in our sights.
So you're starting here, you're going to go down, down, down to Brazil, and eventually you want to go to Africa.
That's right.
You started in New York, then New Orleans.
That's right. And why was Cuba on our list? Well, it's a global musical powerhouse, and to a certain degree untouched. And the fact that, we had to jump through multiple hoops to get down there, and hit the ground running without really knowing anyone there, that sets challenges up significantly higher. We have the backing of over 100 Kickstarter supporters, and so we're really putting our neck on the line to deliver the material and create this collective of musicians. And for me, that's super exciting, because you're really putting yourself at risk in your reputation.
So you first went to New Orleans after New York, then you went to Puerto Rico.
That's right.
How was the process of setting this trip up different when you went to Cuba as opposed to going to Puerto Rico? What were some of the logistical differences in putting it together?
Logistics had more to do with not knowing who the players were down there, and not knowing how we were going to scout out the best talent and be able to curate the groups the way that we have been in San Juan and New Orleans, where there's internet access. You could reach out to Mario Abney, the trumpet player, or Johnny Vidakovich, and book them for the session, and think about still keeping the integrity of the DNA of what happened in my first 21 series, where you could really mix and match. That's really the logistic challenges were.
And you hold yourself accountable to this very rigid schedule. You want to do another one every day, no matter what.
That ups the ante. We try to do it daily, create a brand new group every day for 21 days and film it. And of course, because there wasn't virtually any internet access while we were in Cuba, we could not release the videos per se.
I believe that was one of the biggest logistic challenges for us, because communication was very hard. And as he was saying, so let's say you're in New Orleans and you could go on the internet and look at who's Facebook and call New York and say somebody, or call somebody else, or meet somebody that will give a phone number and you can leave a message. In Cuba, you cannot leave a message in somebody else's cell phone. And because of the expensive nature of communication out there and the control from the government, people that receive a phone call from you and they do not recognize your number, they do not answer because it's going to be expensive. And at the same time, you cannot leave a message. So how are you going to communicate with those people, right? And so this will make the situation very difficult in that matter. But Matt has that very tight schedule, which is really good. And I used to play a joke saying we work like we have a boss, even though we don't.
There's a scene in the series of Cuban videos where you are at a timba show and you decide to spontaneously call Egrem Studios and book a late night session to go back to the studio. And what occurred to me when I saw that was you never let your guard down. You have to be prepared at any moment to go and put one of these things together. It's like a 3-week, 24-hour-a-day gig.
That's right.
Is there any added difficulty, because so much of what happens among musicians happens when you're not feeling the pressure to work, and you're actually asking all of the musicians that you're interacting with to kind of just relax, let down your guard, be you, and let it flow. And yet, in the midst of this flow that you're trying to tap into, you have a real assignment that you have to get through every day.
And I think that has something to do with the magnetic quality of what Tradewinds is. When musicians see that we are on this mission to create brand new original work in the moment over the course of 21 days and basically ask you to improvise a composition in the moment, it's like, okay, we're on board.
Also, I believe like the way we produce the situation, we take the responsibility a lot from the guys that come. So they see that everything is kind of, we kind of lay a situation so they could really relax and do the things we like them to do, or that they would like to do themselves and they cannot someplace else. And they see the brotherhood as a musician and the sincerity as a producer, and they were on the same page, and the bulk of our money goes to pay the talent. And as you were saying, in a situation like that, like we went to see this late night timba, and I sat in playing tenor, and then we end up meeting the other peoples, and Matt already knew a couple of them. And then, let's do that. But, he had the money from our backers to rent the studio, money to pay the guys. So it was a situation that was simple. Everybody was warmed up, and the communication was immediate. Everybody was there. Can you do it? Can you do it? No, I'm not going to be able to do it now. So pop, boom, ping. That's going to be the people, and that's going to be it. So it's like it happened in some magical way.
Yeah.
In some points.
What effect does having raised this through crowdfunding have on the way you think about it? It hadn't occurred to me before that you say you feel a kind of an obligation because people have come up with their own money and you promised you're going to deliver this thing. And so does that give you a different sense of what it represents?
It gives me a sense of responsibility to deliver on the rewards and the work, because it's a lot of money that people are supporting us with.
Well, how much money did you raise for this?
Well, for this one, was it 15?
It was $15,000 through the Kickstarter, but we had a couple other backers that weren't appearing publicly, and also because of Matt's relation with JetBlue, we get a little break in the traveling. But it's money, and there is the responsibility, and also it's like we have a reputation, and then you propose something, and if you don't deliver, when are you going to be able to ask for help or support again?
So each one of these trips is a separate campaign.
That's right. We had one campaign for our New Orleans and San Juan, a separate one for the Tradewinds Cuba. Likely we'll do another Kickstarter for the Brazil chapter to come soon.
If you are enjoying this conversation with Matt and Ze from Tradewinds and are near a computer, open it up to iTunes, look up the Third Story podcast, and leave us a review. Even if you don't usually listen with iTunes, it does a lot to help our podcast grow. Back to the conversation with Matt Geraghty and Ze Luis from Tradewinds talking about their experience in Cuba. So I have to admit that when I was watching these videos, I looked at the view count on YouTube, and it seemed very low to me, especially considering the quality of what you're delivering. You're delivering something that looks like it wants to be on television. I mean, it's produced as if it were excerpts from a television show. It feels that way. It behaves like reality television in a lot of ways. In fact, over the years, I've had a number of conversations with people asking how you could apply the values of reality television to music. And I've always sort of come up short, because I think once you introduce the essential point of view of commercial television into music, something is lost, especially into looking for music, searching for something real. You guys achieved it, I think, in a way, because there is no payoff other than the thing that you make together. It doesn't have to become a hit or become successful or whatever. But it did make me think about why are more people not finding it, and what is your hope for it?
I think it's a great question. And as much as we like getting likes on Facebook and views on YouTube, we know that we're focused on the work, and it may take some time for us to find our perfect target market, and it may not be the U.S. And we're finding a lot of traction in South America, especially since our last videos. In the Cuba series, we're translating it all into Spanish. It takes people time to catch up with what we're doing. And as much as I love the videos that are getting a lot of traction, especially now that we're putting a lot of them on Facebook itself. There are a bunch of videos that are getting some nice views, but that's just one piece of the equation.
Facebook counts and YouTube counts don't match. So some Facebook that we have 1,000 hits have 75 hits at YouTube. But the other thing also is it's a new idea. It's very hard for some people to catch up immediately. All the things we really love and the people we admire that were really real artists took a minute for people to understand them and for them to develop their craft and be able to express themselves and communicate with their audience. It's hard to swallow a new pill, So I believe that's a bit why, and people cannot put their finger to, is that reality show, is that, what is that? And I kind of invented that idea that we are the Antoine Bourdain of gourmet music.
Yes.
It's also about the body of work that we're creating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's important to me, the longer vision of documenting the best musicians in coastal cities along the trading routes. And already we've done 5 concerts at the Iridium with the same concept, where we filmed 21 brand new bands in one evening. In each concert, musicians, over 30 musicians, sometimes are meeting for the first time on stage and improvising a composition in front of a live audience. So we have that body of work as well.
So you obviously had some idea ahead of time before you started to explore this, that there was a common musical language. I mean, I often think about following the clave. To me, I feel like as a drummer, that's what you feel starting in Brazil up through New Orleans and even up into Chicago, that it's basically moving clave around. What were you imagining going to port cities? Were you expecting to find certain similarities that you have found? Is it kind of what you knew already? I mean, what was the general thinking about this?
The general thinking is that we were going to uncover a lot of those similarities, and just naturally as we work with different musicians and reveal those in the videos in a smart way, however we wanted to. But that certainly wasn't necessarily the only reason we wanted to create this map and map it back. It was more if we could apply the same principle that we discovered in New York of maybe it isn't about style. Maybe it isn't that I'm a jazz musician. Maybe there is this common thread of language where you could really just create, with 5 different musicians from 5 different parts of the world in the room, cohesively a composition. And that's what we're continuing to work on.
But interestingly, when you go to Cuba, what you end up with often is the two of you kind of inserting yourselves into these formed units. Certain groups of people who've played together a lot have their own musical shorthand, and then you're finding a way to insert yourself into it. There's a difference between assembling 5 strangers and putting them in a room, or finding a group of people that are essentially like a family and joining them at their dinner table. Did you find that was a difference?
I think it's a constant process of that. We will, in many of the collaborations, be plugging ourselves into an existing group, but we still bring a newness, and we bring our openness and my bass playing and Ze's musicianship to that situation. It's really about the rules that we set in place for that session that distinguishes the collaboration.
I think there is a balance between what you said, that we got in certain families to dine in their table, but there's also different situations like the Rolando Luna with Oliver's track that we pick and choose some musicians and made the thing. But even when you are inside of a pre-established situation like the first video from Cuba with the 5 percussion players, when we met them for the first time, they said no harmony. Yeah, but bass in percussion, that's not a usual situation for them. So they were out of their environment as much as we were out of our environment. And going back a little bit about the clave and the similarities, we somehow found the same rhythms in different places, and yet we didn't get to Brazil. But because I'm from there, I can say in Brazil there are similar rhythms like there were in Cuba, Brazil, Puerto Rico, and New Orleans, and they all the same rhythms that came from Africa with slight different accents or claves and different names. But the second line and the bomba and the baião, they are kind of the same thing, you know. And so we're finding in the niche of where those rhythms pass through and were marked by the local culture, we're finding a little difference in the thread that brought those rhythms to the United States, which is beautiful to see. Like, we're not reading in a book, or we're just there and the things are happening in front of our faces.
I think as musicians who are interested in a lot of different kinds of music, it's something that I think we all kind of know or feel intuitively, but there's a difference between kind of knowing it intuitively and going there and experiencing it.
Yeah,
and
man,
doing
it's like if you see a picture of the Mona Lisa in a book and you go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa, that's the size of it. It's different, you know, like you're living it. And that's what's beautiful about that project Matt carved. We're living the thing. Like, you know, when you figure something out from a manual that was written there, but you discover on your own. It's like you had the intelligence to do so, and you had another feeling like, I found it. So we are having that feeling in a daily basis. We get there as a challenge. Are we going to be able to get that session together? But suddenly everything fades to the background and we're playing the music and those things are happening, and you go like, wow, yeah, ooh, you know, like it's really incredible.
One of the things that I discovered in doing these conversations, in talking to people, is that no matter how much I think about the conversation ahead of time, what ends up happening is I press record and we're never going to be in this room under these circumstances again. Even if we were, it would be a different day. We would have different things to say. It gave me a sense of the immediacy and the importance of being present in the moment when you're doing something.
For
Even
sure.
though I'm a musician and we should always feel this way when we play, I think it's easy to sort of forget about that. What has the process of having to put these things together so quickly and then when they happen have to commit so deeply to them, what effect has that had on the way you approach making music and on the rest of your lives?
I think it's spot on. If the concept is to create a work in the moment, how, you know, have I pulled that back to my personal life? And I think that's, for me, to be content in the moment and know that there really actually is no future or past.
Exactly.
Time is very elusive that way. That's where the magic is.
We always talk about that exactly, and this is one thing that has been so clarifying about life for us, separate from the music, is like, it's now. What you just said, if we get together here tomorrow and we think about, it's going to be completely different. So we start to feel the pleasure of being in the moment. We didn't think about what was yesterday that we're able to do or what we're going to do tomorrow. It's so good what we're doing right now, you know, and then you get immersed in a situation. That's the present. That's now. You don't think about anything, and that's how life should be and how art should be. And what you said too, people tend to forget that. And I think this is one of the things that trade winds bring to us and to the people we reach out to that is most powerful. It's now. Let's enjoy, let's have fun, let's make music, let's act on our lives now, you know. And this is really strong. You can see, you know.
You have had some very high-profile musical relationships in Brazil, unlike going to Cuba where you don't know who to call. When you think about Brazil, is it a different process of kind of deciding if you're going to call your friends and call Caetano or Gil or call those musicians, or how do you think about that?
Well, I'd love to, and Matt, as I said, such a incredible guy picking the talents and so forth. But because of what we said previously, my role had grown a bit more. I believe we trust each other in that matter, and once we go there, we're gonna find talents together. Or
I would love it if you called Caetano.
he might. When we were with Gilberto Gil, yeah. I spoke with Gil about it. Like we go backstage in Matt's birthday. He gave me a present of buying me a ticket to Gilberto Gil's performance at the town hall, and then it was funny because I played that place several times, and there's a line, do you have a ticket to go backstage? I said, Matt, let's go here. So it took one door and one set of stairs were in front of Gilberto Gil, and he was having a conversation with David Byrne, which I played a week before, so with Bebel Gilberto, a tribute to Dave Byrne, Talking Heads at Carnegie Hall. And then, oh, hey, what's up? And there was that. And then I introduced Matt, and then we're like standing together for a second. And I said to Gil, like, Matt is the creator of that project I've been working. We're going to go in Brazil, and I wish you could, give me a call. Very Baiano type of vibe, you know. So I believe we're going to be able to call some people like that. But as well, I know studios and places we're going to be able to work. But I wanted to work the same way we have been working, like
grassroots
equivalence in our inputs to grassroots, and find the guys that are great and try to be, instead of call somebody that we know in advance and they put together something and we're gonna get there, it's gonna be that concept and we're gonna fit in. Just get there and get the guys in short pants, like, hey, I'm here, you want to do it? And people go like, oh, okay, what am I going to do? And then that's when you see the fragility, and people cannot run, they have to walk.
This is an incredible point. You call it the fragility, but when people can't run, a lot of the guys in New Orleans talked about it, that you gave them permission to be themselves. These guys were saying, they just wanted me to be me, to do me. And I think that when it's just happening right now, somebody finds you and they say, okay, we're going to do something right now. Be you. That's something that doesn't happen very often musically, and it does force you to kind of turn off your brain. You can't think about it too much. I think that is a very powerful message that a lot of musicians are moved by, whether or not they're established or not, is that you're just asking them to do whatever the most natural thing is that they would do before they can think about it.
And that's freedom.
So you sent me today this final piece from the Cuban experience. You asked all of the Cuban musicians that you talked to, what does freedom mean to you? As Americans, our relationship with Cuba is complicated, and we would perceive freedom to have a certain amount of political weight. The answer that you got from most of the people was, freedom is my ability to express myself through music. I feel totally free. And most of the people that you talked to said, I feel free in my country because I'm allowed to express myself through music.
Tete Caturla, singer with years with the Buena Vista, articulated it perfectly. She said, freedom doesn't necessarily have to do with politics. Freedom is about yourself, and if you have your personal freedom in your house. So
it's beautiful. People that suffered through centuries, not only through that revolution that came and it was good in the beginning, but they were being changed from the hands of colonizer to colonized. They were used as currency to pay debts from one to the other. And nobody in power in England or Spain or France were giving any credits to the people in that island, which is as big as go from Miami to New York almost, like a flight from Havana to the Caribbean part of Cuba will take you a long time, So these people, they have in their DNA that suffering and their pride, but at the same time, they have a self-censor about, I should not talk about that kind of freedom they are asking me because they are Americans and I might not please my government. But it's not that they are thinking about it. It's like a subconscious. And so because they are successful musicians, they express themselves saying their freedom is in what they do, is in their homes and the attitude they have because they can travel. I can go anywhere I want. I travel with my music or something like that. That's one way that they express themselves, you know. And nobody but Tete Catula, which is an older lady, and she lives previous to the revolution, she talked about the word politics, which nobody didn't even touch, you know.
Do you think that that omission is that's a loud omission when you ask people what does freedom mean? I mean, obviously, when you ask people what does freedom mean in Cuba, there's something that is either being said or not said, both in the question and in the answer. The fact that only one person answered with the word politics, did that stand out to you?
I think people will choose their point in time to make a political statement in that country. We were blown away on one session when the piano player from Interactivo joined us, Robertico. And 2 years ago, he, at a concert in Havana that was nationally televised, came out and called for freedom of election, freedom of information. This is on live TV. I guess their censors couldn't catch up with him, so it was broadcasted. And he got in hot water with the Cuban government. That hit the global press. So I think it doesn't surprise me that we don't have a lot of political statements. That wasn't really the intention of... I'm kind of glad that we didn't capture that.
Exactly. I'm not saying that was our intention. And we weren't looking for that kind of answer. We're looking for what is freedom for you after we play. Is that freedom for you? And when we asked Robertito, what is freedom? He didn't even look to the camera and say, freedom is happiness. You know, like, I don't want to touch that subject, kind of. But it's incredible. Like, some people got eerie, like that lady from the corner we played, that she said, you ask my musicians what freedom means. I don't know if you're going to put me in a video saying, down to Cuba, yeah, freedom is this. So some people are like kind of skeptical. Why are you asking about that? And some other people they are more seasoned, had a very beautiful, they were beautiful answers, you know. And they were being political just by the fact that they were answering that question, you know. That's my vision. But they were not going to the political subject exactly, you know. You don't need to do that. In Russia, when they want to protest, they use the T-shirt under their clothing saying the protest. Nobody sees it, but they know they are protesting somehow. So that's a political
Trade Winds is not about politics.
It's not about politics.
But I think it's very difficult to look at Cuba right now without at least exploring the possibility of what the future holds, particularly between Cuba and the United States. Like, as I said, you're there at a very interesting time. There's a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of speculation for a long time. But there's a lot of speculation right now about what might be able to happen if the channel opens. There's no question that we will benefit from a more open relationship, cultural dialogue with Cuba. I'm very curious to know what happens to Cuba. And that's not a specifically political question. That's as much an economic question and a cultural question. But did you think about that when you were there?
For sure. And, I have two opinions on the matter. I think the structure of the system in place will probably create some problems as money gets invested into that country to have it end up in the hands of Cuban people. What we can do as Trade Winds is build bridges by sponsoring musicians to come from Cuba and be part of our project, our concerts in New York. And we're working on that with a couple great players and slowly pulling the paperwork together. And that's what I feel strongly about.
In all of the cities that you've been so far, you have music in the streets. New Orleans is a city that's known for music in the streets. Havana also is known for music in the streets. Not so much New York. A bit, but not so much. Most cities in the world don't have that same relationship with putting music on the ground. But I think port cities do. Why do you think that is? That the highest art and the most street-level impulse comes together in these port cities?
Supposedly New York, as San Francisco, had that a lot. It changed with the laws and with the change of the music business itself, But in certain way, in New York, I had like, because you cannot practice in your apartment with trumpet because your neighbor is going to throw you out. You might go practice in the park and open your box and get a couple dollars for it. But street art, music in those port cities, they come much more from a cultural, osmotic point of view than academic point of view, right? So when you get to the northeast of Brazil, the guys that play Rebecca, which is that kind of rudimentary violin, and bamboo flutes and percussion, like a conversation, a duel in between people. It's like the blues in the South, two guys riffing in their guitars and riffing. So I believe that is the case, is more of a cultural thing than an academic thing. And here in the United States, because we have much more of academic situation, like you put yourself in a situation that, why am I going to play on the street? That's another level, going to look like a bum or something like that. And in Brazil or in Puerto Rico or in New Orleans too, is different. And even we noticed that is that house called the Spotted Cat. And it used to be like when I arrived in New York or when I came to New York before, when they have the 7th Avenue South and Sweet Paseo, that, like Brecker Brothers and Jaco Pastorius would cross the street to play a Gil Evans band, and everybody was running around and playing each other's band. Like in New Orleans, people after their gigs, they go to the Spotted Cat, they all play together, have a drink, there's no ego, everybody having fun, and then one guy do such a great song, the other guy go, no, don't look at him, look at me, pretend, doing jokes. And so it has more of that cultural thing than an academic or a poster as, oh, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, and this is my attitude.
What's particularly interesting about that is the question of Cuba. They actually have a very deep musical education woven into the fabric, way deeper than we do in the United States.
Exactly.
And yet they're not afraid to play on the streets.
When you said education, most of the musicians that played with us, they were astonishingly good. They had diplomas in physics, dentistry, doctors. They're all incredibly educated. And some people say, like, they're playing percussion. No, but I'm a piano player. And the guy sits on the piano and kick and play a violin. It's not like, oh, I play a little bit of the violin. No, a guy will play Stravinsky on the piano and the percussion or in the violin. So very, very highly educated, But being a socialist place, everything belongs to the people, supposedly. How many times we're able to go to a restaurant and say, can we do a session here on the patio? And those people, oh, suit yourself. So if it was in America, people say like, oh, no, this is private property. How much are you going to pay for it? No, not at this time. Tomorrow before we open. But over there, it was more like that. And musicians are paid by the government for their paid gigs. So when they play in the street, they playing because, they're jamming, they're happy, and because it goes back to the more cultural part of it before they were very much academically trained,
This project happens with one other person generally also, because it's a video project as well. She's not here, but you guys can speak to it a little bit. Just the technical element and the kind of workflow approach of showing up fresh with the camera and some obviously minimal gear, but when you walk into a space, you're trying to be as invisible as possible, but you also have to capture it. How do you deal with just the technical aspect of traveling and trying to capture things on the fly?
So Laura Newman is our filmmaker and director, and she's outstanding, and we could not do Trade Winds without her. Her talents really lie in her ability to be super nimble. Equipment these days is obviously small enough that you can show up to Cuba, maybe hire a side cameraman, but most people look at our work, the incredible work that Laura's been doing, and think that we go down with a 4-person camera crew. She's super talented and is able to pull it off and really provide this multi-dimensional view into the work. Having someone on our team that is able to understand our concept deeply and follow the music and capture it in a smart way, we're super lucky.
Yeah. Also, she's like the back girl, you know. She has the utility belt. All the battery is necessary for 3 sessions. 2 different cameras, you know. She has backups all the way, and she's detached from like, I need to, my hair, you know, like some feminine side. That she is very feminine, but she is very strong in that matter, and technically very, very thorough, you know.
When you capture it visually, sometimes recently in Cuba, you did have an opportunity to work in one of the most famous studios there. And a lot of times you're not in recording studios. A lot of times you're in practice spaces or apartments or on the street. How do you record it?
Through our amazing Ze Luis Oliveira, who's our sound engineer extraordinaire.
Yeah, we figured out like a little formula, right? We have a couple of Zoom recorders, which has the XY microphones and 2 inputs. So I bring good microphones, like pencil microphones, KSMs from Shure studio microphones, and I bring 414s from AKG. So I look for the source that is quieter and put a more sensitive microphone to it, put another XY here, and capture also from the Zoom. So I end up having 8 channels from the Zooms, and because there are 2 cameras usually, if I need reinforcement from the camera mics. So what I do is, like, after we have all, and Laura has the clap, so that clap will make that wave that I'll be able to synchronize all the wave files together, and then I'll mix them properly, seeing what is more important to be in. Do we need all the 8 channels or whatever it is.
How did you decide what to pay the musicians?
Well, first of all, you get to know kind of what you have within your budget and what's feasible to pay the 100 players that you're working with, and you're straight up with them, like, I've got X amount of dollars to pay you. We need you for 1 tune, 2 tunes for that session, and that's the only way to do it, because it's not an option to run out of money when you're in Cuba, because there's no ATMs.
There was the other part of the logistic that now comes to mind. We, in the other cities, we could, like, put the card and take money out, like in Puerto Rico or New Orleans or here in New York, you could go to the ATM and take it out. But in Cuba, if you run out of money, you better have a good situation to go back home, because it might not be money for the cab. So we had to be very... We visit every day after our sessions. We sit down in front of spreadsheet, how much we spend, how much we have left, counting cash, like it was really a serious business in that matter.
But you could leave your cash in the apartment.
Yes, there was a safe in our apartment that they just installed for us, and I was told that the safe was actually illegal to have safes in your homes, but somehow they pulled it off, and that's where I kept the money, and we would exchange X amount of dollars a day as we saw we needed it, and the dollar doesn't go really far in Cuba, unfortunately.
As I mentioned, I just have like a strange obsession with Egrem Studios. I think when Buena Vista Social Club came out, the sound of that record completely floored me, and it actually set a precedent for what you guys did, because that record was totally authentic to a place, but it wouldn't have sounded the way it did if it hadn't been for Ry Cooder and his son and their participation. They changed the sound of that music just like you guys did. You were both witnesses and also participants, and so it changed. But the sound of that old room at Egrem, to me, it's like the example of one of the great sounding rooms. I saw that you recorded in both the new and the old. It seems to me that it's a classic example of when people upgrade things and they try to make it better, that they sort of lose the magic of the original thing. But they're very different rooms. One's very live and one's dead. Can you just tell me a little bit about what it's like to record in those rooms and in that studio? It
was an experience. I mean, just to know 100 years of musical Cuban history took place, it's hard to wrap your head around that.
Did you know you wanted to work in that studio?
I knew it was going to probably happen when you have to document as much as we documented, that we were probably going to end up there, but it was pure pleasure. It's like a super big open room, and you really begin to feel that the space in that room is captured. The depth of how sound bounces against the wall is really a quality that you articulated perfectly, which is captured in the Ry Cooder stuff.
Yeah, the thing is, it's incredible, because they have a way to cut. First of all, it's as old as before people thought about like how we're going to do that to reflect those acoustics. So it's a rectangular room that is huge, half a block. So what happened is the sound waves will rebate and come back, and they kind of place ambient microphones in different spots. So there is a plate, there is a little plate on it that is very particular. And it's like you said, if we do this here tomorrow, it's going to be different. As like their room has that, different every day, but they have that particular sound. Like, let's say, when I was mixing the music that we did over there at the old EGRAM, and by the way, there are two different locations. The old EGRAM is an old Havana, and the new EGRAM is a newer spot, all completely different designed. And we talked about that yesterday because the 21 is recorded in the new EGRAM and had a more dry, compact, current sound.
And I'll be honest with you, when I heard that, I thought, little bit too bad that you didn't have the timba hip-hop session in that room, because the drums from that session are so loud that you couldn't get any real close definition on them. You could hear they were in everybody's microphone.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the particulars of that room. They have little, booths in the back of the room, but they want the musicians to be together. So the percussion player was besides the drummer. Yeah. And then a little further down with a little baffle, like mid high, there was the piano, and behind the piano there was another baffle with the vocalist. So everybody's bleeding in everybody somehow, and they put a couple microphones in distinct places.
Like they know where they want to put them.
They know where they want the mics. That lack of definition somehow is their game. You can hear the room, dude, and you should see the floor of that place and the chairs and the smell. This place is like it's like the Noah's Ark.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about. It's like you walk in the wood, like you can hear us tapping our feet.
The wood.
You can hear, you can hear that, and it becomes part of that incredible moment. But it's unbelievable to walk into that room and see, because you have no idea the size of it. Like you walk,
it's massive. It's like
I'm gonna go talk to the guitar player. Are you there yet? No, I'm getting there.
The positioning that you describe of the way people were spread out in the room, they want everybody in the same room, but they want them in the same room for the bleed. They want that bleed. They want it to be messy, but messy in a very particular way. And you get the sense that something like that room, the dimensions of the room, the fact that that was the sort of the national room, actually could have had an effect and an impact on the sound of the music and the way people thought about making music and recording it.
The size of the room definitely contributes completely to that, And not only to that, I imagine the grandeur of it when people like in the 40s walk into that place when it was brand new and the floor had varnish on it. People go like, wow, you know what I'm saying? It was like in the glass, in the separate control room. That probably was like NASA for them by that time, So
are you in a mode of decompression now from this project? I mean, you really are just finishing it up right now and talking about it. How do you feel about the whole project right at this moment?
Psyched, especially because today we're releasing the finale. Certainly a sense of accomplishment, and psyched to be here talking with you, Leo, so that we could get the word out about it, and it's been such a pleasure. Yeah, there'll be a little bit of a decompression. I'm restless. I want to get right back at it, and we're already starting to put some plans in place for the timing of going to Brazil. I'm much better working on the next project, and it's less about decompression.
I can imagine that it's like an alternate universe, I mean, it happens anyway when you go on the road, but this is a very unique kind of way to go on the road. And putting myself in your shoes, I can imagine coming back to New York and sort of just assuming the role of musician in New York and dealing with the city and all of the stuff that comes with it would be confusing after having gone through this and a little bit of an adjustment.
Reverse culture shock.
I have to say that living in the present, as we were talking previously, has a very high level degree of addiction. You want it to be in that. And after you experiment with that, it's very hard to go back to that breakfast, lunch, dinner, what's gonna happen, and this and that. So, and the second thing about finalizing Cuba project, with all the challenges that we had, we are prepared for whatever.
But can you take that with you into your regular life, living in the present and being prepared for whatever? Do you take the little of that mentality with you?
Well, I believe from the moment we started travel in New Orleans, I said that to Matt, and I always say to him, like, you won't believe, we know we're doing something important, but in 50 years from now, things are going to have a scale that is different. But what I was going to say is, like, when I went to New Orleans and we started to do that and to be present, I said to Matt, man, I had a lift in my life. And now I'm using that. I'm trying to meditate on it in town, you know, the way I do my things. Not that I'm skipping any obligations, but I'm working towards that more and more with my family, with my daily situation. I'm already a guy that cook every day. I have a family, and I try to be as gentle with myself and my family as possible. Low expectations and a high work force, you know.
I think there's no turning back after you have an experience like we have been having, and the greatest thing is that the insights that we've come to in this project, it's all about sharing those and bringing this into more of a community vibe, right? This project's not about me, which is kind of great. It's about all the collectives of musicians that we bring into the fold. That's what makes me happy, It's not about fame, really, but it is about what's next.
It's all, that's another thing, is the present. That's one very strong point. And what you just said, Matt, is not about me, is not about you, is about us. And this is what we are also, the present and us. Those are two such important things in humanity that are forgotten. People forget that it's all about us and forget that it's all about now. So that's, I believe, is two powerful things about this project.
And you can imagine when Trade Winds is done, this global collective of musicians that will be over 1,000 of the best players in multiple continents, and then Trade Winds is done, and then we're already brainstorming other projects along the same line. So whatever, that's when I come back to New York and like think of, okay, as much as it's important to look in the rear view mirror of what you've accomplished, most of the conversations that we have in our team is like new endeavors can be and new dimensions of the work. Also, like, you have to be open, sensitive, and that's another element of the present, that we're so used to that every day that we say, like, opa, this is an opportunity, let's look with the microscope on it, so this is serious stuff in that manner. You get a different perspective of a possibility, like, it's not like, this is not what I was expecting, so let me look for something. No, you have to observe that it might be something there better than you thought you would get. You'll miss it.
Yeah, you miss it. Like, it's like you have to be open, man. Life is like dust. Like, so if you don't catch it, and as you said, sometimes is that moment you say, okay, let me relax and put myself in the mode that I'm going to be able to do this that I want, instead of put myself in a subservient situation trying to fit in. That's the point we're trying to talk all the time. We're leaving our former selves that was trying to fit in to belong to our now selves, our new selves, which are trying to do whatever we want to do. And I don't give a damn if people don't like it. That's me. If you don't like me, somebody else
That's
will.
me right now.
That's what's happening. That's my life. Like, life is what's happening when you're making plans for it. So we're just living, dude. So this is a big difference.
And once you realize that, you begin to understand this, like, limitless quality in everything that Ze just said. It's like, oh, man, we can just basically do this for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Geraghty, Ze Luis, thank you so much.
Awesome, Leo.
Thank you, Lou.
Well, there you have it. Matt Geraghty and Ze Luis from Tradewinds talking about living in the present, surrendering to the moment. It's all about now, and it's all about us. If you enjoyed it, go to third-story.com and leave us a message. Tell me what you thought about it. While you're there, you can sign up for the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and check out some other previous episodes. Something that you might enjoy would be the conversation with Alex Cuba, the singer-songwriter from Cuba, who I spoke with earlier this year. He describes growing up in Cuba and leaving Cuba for Canada. It's kind of a nice companion piece to this conversation, actually. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.